Tonight on Bridge City News, a local Tim Hortons franchisee owner has been locked out of his 4 local restaurants following ongoing public clashes over how the chain is being run. The driver of the fatal hit-and-run accident near the airport over the weekend has turned himself in. And Parliament's Emergency Resources Committee met in Ottawa today over the Trans Mountain Pipeline ruling. Good evening. I'm Paul Arthur sitting in for Hal Roberts. Restaurant Brand International, the parent company of Tim Hortons, has seized the 4 Tim's locations owned by David Hughes of Lethbridge, alleging that he leaked sensitive corporate news to the media. Hughes is the president of the Great White North Franchisee Association, a group that has criticized RBI of mismanaging the coffee chain. Hughes, who denies leaking corporate information, said the association will be fighting this, calling the decision a form of intimidation. RBI, meanwhile, claims the company's decision had nothing to do with his position with the association. Great White North accuses RBI of placing profit above all else and of cost-cutting measures that have resulted in Tim Hortons' quality going down. We have an update on the fatal hit-and-run on Highway 5 that took place near the airport over the weekend. A man walking with a female companion was struck and killed by a red Dodge Ram truck, which left the scene afterward. On Monday evening, the driver of the truck turned himself in along with the owner of the vehicle, who was not driving at the time of the fatality.
The truck has been seized. We executed a search warrant to seize the truck, and we're looking at an examination of the truck. We've taken some statements, and we're going to continue with further statements. So we're still a ways away from looking at any type of charges. We're going to do a complete, thorough investigation and determine what we have and go from there.
It is undetermined if drugs or alcohol were a factor in the collision involving the driver or the pedestrians. This morning probably came early for many kids as they return to school today, and that means school zones are also back in effect. Lethbridge City Police will also be present across the city to remind drivers to slow down in school zones. AMA school safety patrollers, which consist of students in grades 5 and 6, will be patrolling crosswalks near schools to help students cross roads safely. The Alberta Motor Association works directly with over 16,000 students province-wide to make sure the patrollers are properly trained and equipped for the job.
In September, all the patrollers have to go through a training where we teach them how to patrol. And then throughout the school year, they have the opportunity to do winter training where we teach them about cars take longer to stop in the snow and the icy conditions. And then there's spring training as well. And then any schools that want additional training, we can provide that throughout the year.
It just takes about a week or so of just reminding parents and stuff like that, or guardians of the students, just that the rules are in place so that kids can get to school safely, and so that buses have a place to park when they're dropping off the kids.
The school zones are in effect from 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. on school days with a speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour. Wilson Middle School started classes today and brought in a motivational speaker to kick things off. Levi Stanford is a Cardston native and someone whose life turned around when he miscalculated the timing of an explosive he had built and lost his hand and wrist. Spurred by his gratitude to still be alive after he thought he had died, Stanford says he uses Christian values to teach kids how to handle the trials of life.
I'm talking about making smart decisions. Obviously, how I became an amputee was a bad choice on my part. So I want to teach the importance of making smart decisions so that they can avoid a lot of the adversity that's self-inflicted. And then to teach them that it's okay to feel upset, it's okay to be angry when you face opposition, but then where you go from that is entirely your choice. And I want these kids to understand that the way they feel when they face adversity is in their control.
Stanford is also a musician, which he incorporates into his speaking engagements. Lethbridge City Council heard today from Suzanne Lint, chair of the Lethbridge Public Art Project Commissioning Committee, as well as the City Community Arts and Culture Manager Jillian Bracken. The two sought public art approval to the tune of $75,000 for the Round Street Gateway Public Art Project.
The artists really intend and hope, as does the committee, that people will gather there and use the chairs as a place to sit, to visit, to exchange, to get to know each other and to engage socially. So there is a social interaction component to the piece that we hope will be successful.
Deputy Mayor Carlson was absent from the session today. Public art has been a topic of controversy after Councillor Joe Morrow took issue with a $226,000 price tag for art at the ATB Centre Phase 2 back in March. Earlier today, the Lethbridge Pronghorns men's hockey team announced their new bench boss, Murray Nystrom, takes over as the new team head coach. Nystrom is the 10th head coach in team history and comes in after coaching the last 18 seasons with the Brock Badgers of the OUA. Nystrom has quick work to make with the team as the season begins later this week, but does like how his first on-ice session went with the team over the weekend.
We're learning about each other on a daily basis. But I really like what I saw. I really like the energy that the players brought, and I think we can utilize that to move forward and get better week by week.
The Pronghorns men's hockey team has only qualified for the playoffs in 7 of the team's 26 seasons. Greyhound Canada surprised many in Western Canada with its announcement of ending bus service in all 4 Western provinces. Some argue that it's the government's responsibility to step in to subsidize these routes. Others, not so much.
Is it up to the federal government, or is it too unwieldy for the federal government to step in and say, I'm going to take this route from this town to this town, but I'm going to skip this town? I mean, is that truly choosing routing and services and schedules? Is that truly a federal government responsibility?
I had a chance to chat with transportation consultant Mary Jane Bennett about Canada's busing challenges. You can catch the entire interview following today's business news. Alberta RCMP have released an update on the state of rural crime since the launch of their crime reduction strategy 6 months ago. Since then, there have been nearly 650 fewer vehicle thefts, 366 fewer break-and-enters, and close to 2,400 fewer thefts overall. That marks a decrease of 11% in rural property crimes. The strategy has included targeting repeat offenders and has given officers more time for investigations by reducing their administrative duties. Police say they plan to implement a number of new initiatives soon, including enhanced responses for both victims and offenders. Police have arrested a 20-year-old suspect wanted after shots were fired last week at a bustling Toronto mall. Panic erupted at Yorkdale Shopping Centre when shots rang out just before 3 p.m. on August 30th after an altercation between 2 groups of males. Police say no one was wounded when 2 shots were fired, but 2 people were taken to hospital when they were injured while trying to leave the mall. They say Zion Zankar Bahari was arrested yesterday outside Trenton and is facing 11 charges, including 2 of attempted murder. Investigators say a man was attending a memorial service for a homicide victim when he was shot dead in a waterfront park in downtown Toronto. Police say 30-year-old Michael Lewis of Markham was with his 2 children and pregnant wife when he was shot multiple times at close range Sunday evening at Coronation Park. Investigators allege Lewis was approached by 4 men who had a brief discussion with him before shots were fired and that the men fled before police arrived. They say Lewis was pronounced dead at the scene in what was the 4th fatal shooting in the Greater Toronto Area in the past 24 hours. A man has been charged in 2 shootings that left 2 men dead and sent a woman to hospital in Brampton, Ontario. Police say 27-year-old Patrick Doyle is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Clifford Correa of Brampton died in hospital, and a woman in her 20s was treated for life-threatening injuries as a result of the first shooting on Sunday. Derek McKean from the Georgetown area died on the scene of a second shooting later that day. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario is seeking a court injunction to keep a modernized sexual education curriculum that has been repealed by the new Progressive Conservative government. Union President Sam Hammond says the government's decision is an abuse of power and a direct conflict with teachers' professional obligations, leaving the union with no choice but to turn to the courts to protect the safety and health of students. The lesson plan dealt with issues including gender identity, consent, online bullying, and masturbation. The union is also seeking to quash what it describes as a snitch line set up by the province, where parents can flag concerns about teachers who stray from the government's revised interim curriculum. Federal MPs on the Natural Resources Committee met in Ottawa today for an emergency session to discuss last week's game-changing court decision to tear up federal approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. The meeting comes at the request of the 3 Conservatives and 1 New Democrat MP who sit on the committee. Environment Minister Catherine McKenna responded to reporters' questions today.
In terms of vessel traffic, obviously that's an important consideration. And when you look at it, it's not just the increased vessel traffic, which will go from 1 to 7 a week. It's the 3,000 movements that happen in the port in that area there. And we've been taking action to protect the southern resident killer whale. That's top of mind for our government, a species at risk, and we're going to continue doing that. But we have taken significant action, including measures to look at how to manage the vessel traffic that goes through a sensitive area. Also looking at the salmon, which are an important part of the diet for the southern resident killer whales. We need to be serious about climate action. We also need to be serious about protecting species like the southern resident killer whale, and we also need to do consultations with Indigenous peoples. As I said, we're studying the decision, but we are committed to getting TMX built and doing it in a sustainable way. In partnership with Indigenous peoples, and also to taking action on climate change.
Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre says the $4.5 billion the Liberal government agreed to pay Kinder Morgan for the project is being wasted because of a failure to plan for the decision. The physical and emotional well-being of Canadian children is being called into question following a new report from Children First Canada and the O'Brien Institute for Public Health. The study finds high rates of suicide, child abuse, infant mortality, and mental health hospitalization of children across the country. The report says the number of people between the ages of 5 and 24 who have been hospitalized for mental health concerns has jumped 55% over the past decade. Canada was also found to be in the top 5 countries around the world for child suicide. A state of emergency has been declared in Mississippi as a strengthening tropical storm, Gordon, bears down on the U.S. Gulf Coast. The Mississippi Emergency Management Agency is warning of possible tornadoes with flash flooding, high winds, and a storm surge also threatening the southern part of the state. Canada, the UK, and the United States are all condemning the guilty verdict and 7-year sentence handed to a pair of journalists in Myanmar. British Prime Minister Theresa May joined Canada in the call for the reporters' immediate release, while the U.S. Embassy in Myanmar issued a statement saying there were clear flaws in the case and that the verdict was deeply troubling. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland says the verdict in the case seriously jeopardizes the idea of democracy in Myanmar. Forensic investigators and researchers are awaiting access to the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro after it was gutted by a fire over the weekend. They are hoping to find out how the blaze began and what remains of the 20 million artifacts that made the museum one of the most important in Latin America. After a fire tore through the museum Sunday, engineers were doing tests on the structure to make sure that it wouldn't collapse. A highway overpass has collapsed in the crowded Indian city of Kolkata. Televised images from the scene show a 30-meter-long section drop to the ground with about a half a dozen vehicles falling with concrete. Firefighters and police are working to free people from the wreckage, with as many as 8 taken to hospital. There have been no immediate reports of deaths. A replacement bridge under construction at America's second busiest port isn't just a crucial route for cargo trucks and Southern California commuters. It's a concrete and steel science experiment for engineers and seismologists.
And about 15% of all the containerized cargo entering the United States travels over that bridge every day. So it's a nationally significant and important bridge for the nation's economy. Some of the features that are included in the analysis, we actually have seismic dampers which attenuate the energy in an earthquake. The bridge will be instrumented to monitor ground motions so that we can determine the exact accelerations and forces that were imparted on the bridge so that we can quickly put it back in service after a major earthquake. It's designed for both the earthquakes that we would expect to happen within the life of the bridge, but it's also designed to withstand large earthquakes that might occur on a 1,000-year frequency and not collapse. We're going to instrument the bridge and the bridge foundations with about 75 sensors or accelerometers that actually measure the accelerations that are imparted from a seismic event or any other thing that would cause strong ground motions.
After a rather cool day today, things are going to warm up. Weather details are coming up. Partly cloudy with a low of +4 with a risk of frost. Tomorrow, mainly sunny, a high of 22. Thursday, sunshine and 26 degrees. Friday, sunny and hot, reaching all the way to 28. Cooling down some for Saturday, though. A mix of sun and cloud with a high of 21. Sunday, partly cloudy and 18. Looking at our almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 degrees with an average low of 7. Highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2003 at 35 degrees. Our record low was +1 in 1999. Sunrise was at 6:51 and sunset at 8:10. Let's have a look at how tomorrow is shaping up across the country. Vancouver, mainly sunny, high of 21, except 26 degrees inland. For Victoria, mainly sunny with a high of 23. Both Calgary and Edmonton will be mainly sunny and 20. Regina, sunshine and 21. Saskatoon, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 20. Winnipeg, sunny and 19. And the heat continues in Toronto tomorrow with mainly sunny skies and 32. Ottawa, a mix of sun and cloud with a 40% chance of showers late in the afternoon, along with the risk of a thunderstorm and a high of 30. Montreal, increasing cloudiness in the afternoon, then a 60% chance of showers with a high of 32. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, a mix of sun and cloud in the afternoon, a high of 28. Halifax, Nova Scotia, sunny and 24. Charlottetown, sunshine and 23. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 19. Canada is facing a fresh deadline to save its place in the North American Free Trade Agreement as negotiations are set to resume tomorrow in Washington. Trade experts say Canada and the U.S. need to present a text to Congress by October 1st in order to join the deal the Trump administration signed with Mexico last week. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will move ahead on a deal with Mexico alone if an agreement with Canada isn't reached in time for Congress to approve it before Mexico's new president takes office. Nike stock was down in early trading following an announcement that former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick has a new deal with the athletic clothing and footwear maker. Kaepernick already had a deal with Nike that was set to expire, but it was renegotiated into a multi-year agreement to make him one of the faces of Nike's 30th anniversary Just Do It campaign, according to a person familiar with the contract. Shares of Nike were down 2% in early trading. One of Britain's biggest trade unions is joining calls for a new public vote on leaving the European Union, saying voters were misled during the 2016 referendum campaign. The GMB union, which has more than 600,000 members, says the promises made during the referendum campaign are, quote, simply not the reality we are facing. The union adds Britons voted to leave the EU, but they did not vote for economic chaos or to put jobs and hard-won rights on the line. Cranberry farmers in the U.S. have asked the American government for permission to destroy a quarter of their crop in response to a glut that has kept prices low and growers operating in the red. The Boston Globe reports that after struggling with an oversupply of the berries for nearly 2 decades, growers around the country are asking the U.S. Department of Agriculture for authorization to sell 75% of the supply and discard the rest. If the government approves their request, farmers would hold back roughly 45 million kilograms of cranberries. Now here's a look at the markets. Recapping one of our top stories, a local Tim Hortons franchisee owner has been locked out of his 4 local restaurants, this following ongoing public clashes over how the chain is being run. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. If you missed any of today's stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Greyhound Canada surprised many in Western Canada with its announcement of ending bus service in all 4 Western provinces. So whose responsibility is it to fix this? Some say government, others say leave it to the free market. Transportation consultant Mary Jane Bennett weighs in on this coming up next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Are you going through divorce or separation? Find support and encouragement at Divorce Care beginning September 11th at 7 p.m. at City Light Church. Divorce Care is a weekly meeting where you'll find a warm and caring environment during a difficult season of your life. For more information, visit divorcecare.org or call Sandra at 403-892-7046. You're invited to the grand opening weekend of One Life Church, 501 40th Street South on September 15th and 16th. On Saturday, come to the open house from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. to meet Pastor Wayne Boersma. And on Sunday at 10:30 a.m., hear from special guests Fred and Val Bennett. Enjoy delicious refreshments and meet new friends. For more information, visit onelifechurch.ca. The Paw Society is having their biannual dinner and silent auction taking place Saturday, September 29th at 6 p.m. at the Westminster Hall. Come out and enjoy a delicious chili dinner with all the fixings, plus an ice cream bar. Tickets are $25 for adults, $5 for kids ages 6 to 12, and free for children under 5. Get your advance tickets at Just for Pets or reserve them by calling 403-328-6700. Donations for the silent auction are greatly appreciated. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Greyhound Canada surprised many in Western Canada with its announcement of ending bus services in all 4 Western provinces. Many rural Canadians depended on the bus service, so now what? Joining us to discuss this further is Mary Jane Bennett, a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute and a transportation consultant who has also served for many years as a board member with the Canadian Transportation Agency. So, Mary Jane, good to have you with us. The announcement seemed to catch a lot of us off guard. What were the reasons behind Greyhound's decision to stop bus service?
Well, Paul, there's a number of reasons. First of all, Greyhound was losing money big time, $70 million over 5 years. It claimed a 41% decline in ridership. What was behind the move, if I can rank the different reasons prompting the move, I think that the economic regulation would figure as one of the main reasons for it. Also, the Greyhound has claimed there was alternatives from different modes. For example, Swoop, where you can fly from Abbotsford, just outside Vancouver, to Winnipeg for $69, and other ride-sharing apps and the like. That the whole transportation scene has changed since the 1950s and 60s, and government has been trying to catch up, but I think that people right now are realizing that we're in a new modern era.
Yeah, times have changed for sure, and if you're not making a buck, it's hard to keep going. Now you mentioned regulatory constraints and so forth. Are there certain regulations the government could change that would be helpful to bus companies?
So this is there's a bit of a history lesson here, Paul, and what it is that after the Second World War, when Canadians started moving by across Canada and busing became a concern, the federal government, involved in other modes of transportation, got involved into busing. But it delegated that authority basically to the provinces on the understanding that they would treat extra-provincial busing, that is, beyond borders and on international routing, that they would treat those extra-provincial busing no different from busing within their province. This gave provinces wide scope to regulate, which they did on schedules, routing, and for as schedules or routing to be changed, it was a very onerous position requiring notice and the like. And so this situation carried on until the 1990s, when some provinces, notably your province, Alberta, and Ontario, and a couple of the Atlantic Canadian provinces said, we want to move to deregulation of the industry. A royal commission was struck. It said, the way to go is deregulation. The only parcel that should be left for the federal government is on safety, that this idea of micromanaging busing services just could not be sustained. There was a motion in 1999 by the federal government to deregulate the industry, but that died on the order paper. So that's where we are, and I think that's where the future lies, is deregulation of the industry.
Right. Yeah, too many rules always make it more difficult, I think, for businesses, generally speaking. Now, what kind of numbers are we talking about here, Mary Jane? How many locations are going to be losing bus service in Western Canada now?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. Greyhound points to 2 million passengers being affected, but that, I think, means the entire number of people that have used bus services in the Western Canadian provinces in the past year. For example, I know that there's about 600,000 in BC, about 400,000. So I think that what the concern of Canadians generally is not our 2 million people being inconvenienced. It's who are actually those that will be inconvenienced. And from that, we know that there's 350 routes. From a report that was done within the last 10 years or so, the report points to only probably 20% of the 1,000 routes. It was a cross-Canada Greyhound situation, 1,000 routes across Canada. The report said about 20% are inconvenient. So if we take 350 routes and 20%, there's probably about 70 communities that will be inconvenienced. The rest have alternative providers, and there are new entrants cropping up as well.
So perhaps not as harsh as we maybe first thought. At the same time, though, if you're one of those people affected, well, you know all about it then, right? So, and certainly there's no question that this move will have a significant impact on rural Canadians. Many do want the provincial government to subsidize these bus routes to keep them going. And in fact, Alberta and BC, with NDP governments, of course, have at least in the meanwhile decided to subsidize. Can you explain exactly what they've done?
Okay, let's see. Well, BC, because there was the push in the murdered and missing Indigenous women in the Prince Rupert, Prince George region, the federal and provincial governments moved in with a $7.3 billion subsidy to ensure that this terrible situation would not be repeated. That move, says Greyhound, prompted its exit, because with a loss of, say, I think it was 13 million in BC the previous year, while a subsidy of 7.3 billion is just kind of took them off their tracks. So you can see how subsidies do impact the business decisions. So that's what happened in BC. In Alberta, there has been some many providers have stepped up. Even I think Ryder Transportation from Saskatchewan is moving into the Calgary-Edmonton routes further moving east. So opportunities are abounding. The Minister of Transport has said in 2009, Greyhound stopped a number of routing in Alberta, and all sorts of other providers stepped up to the plate. So why should I subsidize? So you can see there is this movement, this healthy movement of industry.
Well, I mean, you think about it, right? I mean, if we do have some private companies stepping up to the plate, and there are some, they're essentially competing against a government subsidy, right? It can make it much harder for someone to take the risk to step in there, or if they do step in, will they succeed or not? Well, it's like a bottomless pit of cash that's there from the government, right?
Yeah, and that does deter the entrant, as I mean, Greyhound said that, and Greyhound said that because that's what triggered their exit from BC. And the other entrants, like when Greyhound left Vancouver Island, which is right in my neck of the woods, Tofino All Island Express cropped up. Casper Transportation is thinking of moving into Manitoba. It's a Thunder Bay based operation, and it's thinking of moving into Manitoba to take on some of those routes. Number of Manitoba cities are kind of enthusiastic about the opportunities that are presented.
Okay, so it looks like Manitoba and Saskatchewan, with conservative governments, they are getting some people stepping up saying, hey, yes, we will take a gamble here. There's no subsidies here, so we can maybe start up a bus company.
And not only that, it's not only in if you can use big cities, medium-sized cities and small cities, and people consider the smaller, not cities, the smaller towns and municipalities to be the hardest hit, but there are other options. For example, Lyft, an app-based ride-sharing program in the United States, says that 94% of riders or of transportation users in the States are connected just through Lyft. And that was one of Greyhound's complaints, was that Kijiji and Craigslist and Papa Lyft, or I can't recall the name of it, are cropping up saying, we've got the smaller vehicles. We can do it for more cost efficient, better routing, better scheduling, because the Greyhound left the big cities at a convenient time for the city dwellers, less convenient when you're 300 miles down the road.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's one thing, even compared to the States. We have more territory to cover. There's less population centers in this country, so it does make it more of a challenge. But as you point out, I mean, I think that's what you probably have to do in a small town, because, I mean, the more remote the town, the smaller the town, the chances of getting a bus service there just drop a lot, because it's so much more difficult to make a profit there. But as you point out, potentially, a shuttle service that's smaller, or some of these these Lyft kind of companies can perhaps take a run at it. Hopefully that's what happens. I mean, yeah, otherwise you're going to have to line something up with your neighbor, I guess, and maybe in the days past that's the way it was, right? You asked your neighbor for a ride, and but it does make it certainly, I think, difficult for somebody who's maybe on short notice needing to catch a ride. So now, if somebody has a medical issue, and that's an issue that's come up a lot. Okay, I've got to go see a doctor. This is super important for my health. Is there a place perhaps for government to subsidize to some degree those kinds of situations, or is that opening Pandora's box?
Well, I think that those health-related, there will be somebody that will jump in that area, knowing that there will be a federal government or a provincial government health subsidy to cover the transportation costs, as there are for remote northern fly-in communities, have health costs paid by a government subsidy. So there will be some service that will be interested in that. I noticed that in Indigenous medical services, there is a chief from, I'm not sure whether it's Norway House, I'd have to check my notes, but that they're moving in to cover those kind of services. So there's all sorts of good stories emerging from this.
Okay, so we're believing that nobody's going to fall between the cracks. Hopefully that's the case. The Prime Minister says the federal government is considering loan guarantees and startup funds to help some private bus companies step in. But my understanding, this is more for the cities, maybe medium-sized and so forth, not being offered for the more remote rural communities. And isn't that where they need it more there, wouldn't they?
That's the problem, because you are connecting, Calgary and Regina are being connected somewhat, so that if you start, is it up to the federal government, or is it too unwieldy for the federal government to step in and say, I'm going to take this route from this town to this town, but I'm going to skip this town? I mean, is that truly choosing routing and services and schedules? Is that truly a federal government responsibility. I think this is why the move in the 90s towards deregulation was prompted by this kind of concerns, that this isn't really where we should be going. If municipalities have funds set aside for social services and for health related concerns, that is one thing.
Well, any predictions as to what we may see happening here with bus service come November 1st after Greyhound officially steps out?
Well, I think it's a good news story. I think that there will be new entrants, and I think that the banner of deregulation of an industry that basically died through overregulation and hearings as to whether you could skip Neepawa and move to Dauphin and these kind of concerns. Those are days of the past, and so I think that these are good news stories, and there will be new entrants. There will be people that might fall through the cracks, but I don't think that Greyhound offered them the great alternative of pulling into a town on an empty bus at 3 a.m. is a great news story either.
I guess we'll see what happens here come November, but as you say, hopefully private companies will step in and fill that gap. Thank you so much, Mary Jane Bennett, transportation consultant and senior fellow with the Fraser Institute.
Thank you.
Many of us are looking forward to a comfortable retirement, but many of us also don't have a clear plan on how to ensure that actually happens. How much money do I need to set aside each and every month? Where's the best place to invest my money? Joining me now in studio is Nathan Giesbrecht. He's a senior financial advisor based out of Red Deer, Alberta, with the Investors Group. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you.
Nathan, where's the best place to invest my money right now? Is it in the pot market?
Is it in the pot market? Good question.
No, probably not.
Well, I mean, there's many options. And so one of the first things that I would say, Hal, is we need to diversify, number one. Number two, we need a plan. Right. So often I hear of stories like, hey, my buddy said this is a good choice for me. Should I do it? And naturally, my first reaction is, well, tell me about your buddy. Because are you the same person? Do you have the same goals? Do you have the same
lifestyle?
Everything.
Spending habits?
Everything.
Investing habits? Sure.
Yeah, and so it really, truly does need to be tailored to you and your family. And so the quick answer is, should I invest in marijuana stocks? Maybe. I don't know. But there's a ton of options out there.
Is real estate still the best way to go?
Real estate it can be a good investment. Now, when you're comparing the math, Hal, and this is sometimes when I'll talk to a real estate savvy investor. So often for the real estate math to work, you need to be leveraged up. You need to borrow, so maybe 5% down to make the math look really, really good. Right. If I'm taking a look at pure value increase of a home versus value increase of, let's say, the stock market, what most Canadians don't know is that the appreciation of real estate over the last 50 years in real estate is about 2.5–3%.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's inflationary. Whereas the market itself can be, inflation +4, inflation +5, maybe even 6 if you're looking at foreign investments.
A financial advisor I spoke with many years ago said, you're lucky, Hal, if you break even. Not in a market like Toronto or Vancouver where, the prices can skyrocket, but let's say Lethbridge or Red Deer, maybe a smaller market like Brandon or maybe Chelsea, Quebec or someplace. Because of all of the expenses you have over the years. A brand new kitchen, $100,000.
Yes.
Your shingles, your windows, your driveway, everything, plus the interest you're paying and the taxes. Yes. You said over 40 years, you're lucky if you actually break even.
And that could very well be the case. In fact, we were just chatting off air about that. Home ownership is wonderful, but it isn't the end all and be all. And so what I say to people is, don't fret if you can't get into a home immediately. Now, the idea where home ownership makes a lot of sense is maybe you're a bad saver. Personally, you're just not good with savings, and so having home ownership forces you to essentially build equity in a home, and you're saving some money and some equity over your lifetime. So that can make sense. The other thing I talk about, Hal, is where does that often come from? So much of the strategies that one will hear is maybe from loved ones or mentors. And for example, if your mentors or maybe your parents, And, you know, let's say your parents maybe grew up in the 70s and 80s when interest rates were, you know, 17, 18, 21%.
And people had to walk away from their homes a lot of
Exactly.
times, right? Yeah.
So back in the day when your mortgage was 19%, yes, pay down that high debt and build equity, and that made sense. But today, the math is very, very different. And so, you know, my advice to Canadians is it's not a blanketed solution. We need to make sure that we're looking at all the variables, the interest rate you're paying, the income tax that you're paying, the cash flow that you have, what possible expenses would be going into that home, and then we would decide what's best for you.
How about renting versus buying?
Yeah, again, you know, if
you know some successful people who rent, right?
I do. I actually know of an individual in Alberta that's worth north of $100 million, and he's rented all his life.
Wow.
And the math for him made absolute sense.
So where did he make his money?
He made his money in the stock market.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he made his money in the stock market, and he continued to invest and reinvest, and those dividends that continue to pay, he continued to put that back into the market and felt that, hey, I don't need to spend $20,000 on a new roof. I'll invest that back into the market.
Right.
Did very, very well.
How about precious metals? Is that the way to go right now in the stock market?
Yeah, great question on precious metals. Here's something that most Canadians don't know. At the turn of the 19th century, an ounce of gold, 1 ounce of gold would buy you one nice man's suit.
Sure.
An ounce of gold today buys you the same
nice suit. Yeah, you're right. That's true.
So net of inflation, gold isn't making you any money over the last 100 years.
Mind you, that's a very nice suit. What's gold now? $14.50 an ounce.
Yeah,
I mean,
so, but you can buy.
That's a pretty nice suit.
You could buy, but back in the day,
Yeah.
you know, for $50, you could buy a nice suit.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make is, precious metals has its place in a portfolio. You know, if you're able to buy, you know, when maybe it's down and it spikes up very quickly, like where often we see precious metals do well, Hal, is when markets are volatile. Stock markets crashing in 07, 08, and people were flooding to something they could hang on to, precious metals. But, you know, since then, if you look at the growth in precious metals, it's just not there.
How about oil? It's going up again.
Yeah.
It's rebounding nicely, the market.
Yeah, and so if I have a client that says, I want to own, you know, oil itself, we're not a big fan of owning an index per se. So, for example, when somebody says to me, hey, the TSX is down today. Okay, but inside of the TSX itself, there's some great companies that you own. And so we're more focused on those great companies. So maybe in this case, you're saying oil. There's some great energy companies out there that are doing very, very well today. And so maybe it'd be better to indirectly own oil via these companies versus owning oil itself, which can be extremely volatile.
There's also a pipeline that's for sale, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. The government's trying to unload it.
Yeah, no
right?
kidding. Yeah.
So that might be an opportunity. It's just the construction cost, the $7.4 billion
with a B,
you got to come up with, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now let's talk about, I want to save enough money to retire comfortably.
Yes.
Okay? I'm 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 and 50, retiring maybe by 65 or 70. How much should I allocate or put aside every month to be able to achieve that goal?
Great question. Great question. So I'm going to give you a real simple answer for the 20-year-old. And it is amazing. It is amazing if you can do this for as a 20-something, 20, 23, 24, 25. There's a statement that you receive every year after you file your income taxes known as the Notice of Assessment. And on the Notice of Assessment, Hal, it tells you how much RSP room you would have to contribute every year. And if you're 23 or 24 and you just max out those RSPs every year and max out those TFSAs every year, you will retire comfortably.
Oh.
As long as those investments are in something moderate in terms of risk or above, you'll be absolutely fine. What tends to happen is life. Life gets in the way.
Sure.
You start having a family, you make choices, and sometimes we don't always do so well, and so now we maybe think we got to double down on the risk, and so all of a sudden it becomes problematic.
You know what? I've actually cashed in some of those RSPs for a down payment on a house.
There you go.
Right?
Now that is a great strategy for the right individual. Home buyer's plan can be a wonderful strategy. In fact, you know, it was a federal government program that was initiated when we were going through a bit of a recession, and the government said, "Hey, let's find a way to help people get into the homeowners market." Great strategy. Just make sure that you're paying those loans back, those loans to self over a period of time.
Okay. How about somebody who's in their 30s? How much should they set aside?
Well, a good rule of thumb, you know, that I suggest to people is. Take a look at your portfolio today, whatever it is that you have in a portfolio, and then times that by the number of fingers and thumbs that you have. So 5 on one hand. So if you've got a $100,000 portfolio, and you take 5% of that, that's $5,000 a year. That's what you can draw per year on that portfolio, and it'll essentially last you a lifetime if you're a moderate investor and you're prudent with your savings. So $1 million portfolio would generate about $50,000 a year. And on top of that, hopefully you'll have some old age security, you'll have some Canada pension, and so that's roughly what your portfolio would look like. So it really does depend on lifestyle. Do you currently live on $30,000 a year? Do you live on $80,000 a year? I know people that struggle to live on $300,000 a year. So it really does depend on income and lifestyle.
So lifestyle, another way I guess we could save money and look about allocating some of those funds into investments would be maybe not going out to eat every day or every second day, right?
Yes.
Especially if you have a family of 4, because it could cost $100, $150 a meal, right?
Yes, quite easily. In fact, something that
so living more modestly, I guess, right?
Live prudently.
Within your means.
Yes,
right?
And so we've all heard that golden rule, pay yourself first and live below your means. But that golden rule of 10%, I'm telling you, Hal, that's not enough. It's not enough. So just the RSP contributions alone is 18%. So do you remember I talked about if you max out your RSPs and TFS, we're talking more like 25%. And if we wait longer in life, I've actually recommended to some couples, live on one income and save the other. Oh. Because they're that far behind. So if they're both making $75,000 a year, live on one income. So take that one income that you're paying all your bills with, that $175, and then take the other $75 and put that towards savings and then debt repayment. Because they're 7 or 10 years away from retiring and they have very, very little money left in savings.
Back when I was a kid, my parents would always talk about investing as well. They would talk about treasury bills, T-bills, and bonds. And
yes.
Is that still prevalent today?
Okay, so that goes back to the 80s.
Right.
So what was happening, Hal, was in the 80s when interest rates were so high because of inflation, you could turn a Canada savings bond into 17, 18, 20%. That was good return on investment. But today, that same Canada savings bond is paying you 1%.
Wow.
So, my concern with that CSB paying you 1% is inflation's 2.5%. So your money needs to be working harder than inflation. So when I'm talking to a client, now it's different if you're needing this money back in 6 months or a year, so we need to take low risk, or maybe you're very, very close to retiring and you can't handle volatility in the market. So our goal is to try to just keep pace with inflation. But if you're, in your 20s or in your 30s or even 40s or 50s, you need to be at least keeping pace with inflation and trying to beat inflation by maybe 1 or 2%.
How about investing your money in hobbies? I know people who invest their money in muscle cars. They go down to the United States, bring up these cars, put maybe 10 or 20,000 into them. All of a sudden, they've got a car with over $150,000.
Yes.
Do you have many clients as well that invest in their various hobbies? I know a guy in Costa Rica has got over 6,000 Matchbox and Hot Wheels cars.
Wow.
Collectors.
Wow.
Because I showed him my little collection of 30 cars. He laughed at me. He says, nice try, rookie. I'm like, okay, thanks for coming out, right? Let me show you my 6,000. You got 6,000?
Yeah.
So that collection is worth huge money, right?
Yes.
So do you meet people as well that want to invest into different hobbies that they have?
Yeah, we have some clients over the years that want to invest in their hobbies, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think for me, I would say to that same client, number one, diversify. Don't have all your money in oil. Don't have your money all in the stock market. Don't have it all in real estate. Don't have it all in Hot Wheels. Diversify. Now, part of the reason that some people invest in their hobby is because it's a passion of theirs.
Sure.
So I respect, okay, I'm investing some money in a passion, and if you can make a little money at the same time, wonderful. But what if those Hot Wheels cars all of a sudden fall out of favor and you can't liquidate, to the same degree that you thought? So have a plan B. I think that's really important.
You know what's funny? When I was a kid, it was hockey cards. And you could get the Gretzky rookie hockey card for $10 or $20. Now it's worth like $1,200, $1,400 or thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
But that market goes up and down as well,
That's
right?
right.
It fluctuates.
You have to sell it. Somebody has
Right.
to buy it for it to be worth
Right.
that. And some of those, collector items, a lot of collectors are saying, well, I don't want to sell it.
Right.
It's the same as, I have a home and I don't want to sell it in retirement. I want to keep this home as long as I can. Okay, well, then we can't really use that equity to help you fund your retirement. So it really depends on, how we're using, these hobbies, these cars, whatever it is to fund that retirement. That's why diversifying, I think, is so important.
Okay, let's say I'm a homeowner. I've got maybe another $50,000 to $60,000 left on the mortgage, maybe even $100,000. Should I pay down that mortgage quicker, faster, have clear title on my property?
Yes.
Or should I maybe take that money and invest it somewhere else?
Yeah, good question. In fact, I had 2 emails today on that very question as I was coming to the studio. So number one, if you're getting close to retiring and you've got a home that's almost paid off or completely paid off, you now have all this equity in that property that's really arguably sitting idle. So one of the things that I recommend to Canadians is create liquidity. Major corporations around the world have liquidity all the time because they maybe need cash to deploy for whatever purpose. So as a consumer, we need to do the same. Now, naturally, these consumers who are on the verge of retiring are saying, well, I don't want to get into all this debt. Yeah. I didn't tell you to get into debt. I said create liquidity. So imagine you have a $500,000 house and you could put a $400,000 secured line of credit on that property at prime plus half, something like that. You now have access to $400,000 of capital that you could use in the event of an emergency or an opportunity. And sometimes I see Canadians redeeming investments to help out family members like children or grandchildren. I'd say, well, is this a loan to your son or daughter or is it a gift? No, it's a loan, Nathan. Okay, well, why wouldn't you use that line of credit thing? It's all set up. You don't have to redeem investments that may be up or down right now. So if we're redeeming a large sum of investments, there's capital gains that may need to be paid. What if the markets are down, Hal? So there's other options. So creating liquidity, I think, is very important. Getting equity in the home to work for you as maybe somebody that's younger can also be a very, very good strategy. Leveraging your home can be good. It's an aggressive play. But you know, if you know what you're doing and you're comfortable with the risk, it could be fantastic.
I know some seniors who've bought into the reverse mortgage mantra. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not a big fan of the reverse mortgage program.
Why is that?
And I'll tell you why is most consumers don't really understand the amount of interest they're going to be paying over 10, 20, 30 years. It really does strip a lot of the equity out of the home. And so there's nothing really left for children in terms of the estate. There may be very, very little left for potentially long-term care. If now we're in our 80s and we need to sell the home and move into a long-term care facility. If it is the last resort, getting back to your original question, it might be more prudent to sell and rent. And so now we sell the home, take that capital, put it into some sort of savings plan, and then rent. That way we're not paying interest charges and falling behind. So I know there's a place for reverse mortgages in the marketplace. I'm just saying know all the costs and know all the risks.
When my wife and I had our children, you know, we had this financial advisor sit down with us many years ago and talked about RESPs.
Yes.
Right, and how beneficial they were. And I'm like, great, okay, so what happens, let's say we pay into the RESP, but my kids decide, they don't want to go to college or university.
Yes.
What happens to that money? They said, well, you get back your money. I said, what about the interest? That stays in the pot for the other people.
Yeah.
What?
Okay, so that's called a pooled RESP.
Right.
Yeah, so
that didn't sit well with me. I'm like, all that interest, it goes to somebody else? Like,
right.
What?
Yeah.
So how is that today?
Well, the pooled plans are still that way, you know,
Wow.
and so you want to be careful as a consumer to understand the differences between pooled plans, where it's kind of going back into the pot, or self-directed plans. Personally, I own self-directed plans. I have 3 boys, 11, 13, and 15, and they're all in a self-directed plan. You know, and they're a great program if you know how to, you know, essentially get them started. So to answer your question, if my oldest doesn't go to school, essentially then there's some interest that I've created from the program. Sure. Then there's some government money that I received. I can actually deploy that to my other boys, or I could potentially take some of that interest and put it into my own RSP. I have to give away that government grant money that they gave me if I don't have room for my children. But they're great programs. I would highly recommend RESPs, self-directed programs. They're fantastic.
Not the pool programs, that's right.
No, I'm not.
Everybody into the pool?
Yeah.
No, not everybody.
Well, and that's the problem. If you pay into this thing and then your kids don't, you know, go to school, right. Then what? And you know, over the years, the government's actually made RESPs more flexible. So now you don't have to, you know, essentially wind up an RESP when the kid is 18. You've got more time, which allows the student to maybe they want to work for a few years and then figure out what they want to do with their life. And so now they're 25 and they can go to school and they've got this money there.
Nathan Giesbrecht, Senior Financial Advisor with Investors Group from Red Deer. Thanks a lot for joining me.
You're welcome.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge CD News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.